What's up, guys? Dr. Shepherd here, and thank you so much for registering for this webinar talking about my 5 favorite anxiety management strategies. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was kind of hard to pick just 5. So I feel like after all of this time of struggling with my own anxiety and using these techniques to help my patients, there are so many different things that I found helpful for anxiety. But what I tried to do was just focus on what strategies I use most often for myself and for my patients. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's get started. All right. So my standard disclaimer that this is not medical advice. This is just meant to be educational content and should not replace or supersede the advice of your doctor or therapist, ever. Nothing you find on the internet should replace the advice of your doctor or therapist. What information I'm going to give you is going to be stuff that can be helpful for people who are suffering from any kind of anxiety disorder or people who just have general stress or other sorts of difficulties in their life. But not all of the advice is going to work for everyone. And that's why I try to give you guys a variety of different resources and different tips and tricks in my videos, this webinar, and in other social media stuff, because I know that everybody is going to be different and what works for one person may not work for another. That being said, none of this stuff is going to work right away. And that can be a really frustrating part of recovering from an anxiety disorder or even just improving the amount of stress that you have in your life. But practice is going to make perfect. So I promise if you keep working at this stuff, it will get better, it will become easier, and you will be able to improve. Remember, even if it feels like it, you didn't develop these anxiety disorders overnight. These are things that have come up over the course of many years. They're the results of these complicated biological factors, social factors, and just ways of thinking that we've developed over the courses of our lives. And so it's not something that can be fixed overnight, but you can get there. And just know that there is so much more for you guys to learn. So I am just going to be at the tip of the iceberg with this whole presentation. So by no means are we talking about the only strategies available. There's so much more for you guys to know. And this is a big part of why I created the Anxiety Bootcamp course that I will talk a little bit about later on in the webinar. It's just basically a very comprehensive course to discuss tips like this and things that are going to help get you through your anxiety and kind of a way to coach you through some of the changes that you need to make in order to improve your anxiety. All right, so without further ado, let's get to it. And I know some people know a little bit about my story from maybe things they've seen on social media, but I thought I would start by kind of giving you the before and after. So in many ways, my life was before panic attacks and after panic attacks. And this picture actually really encompasses a lot of the way that I was feeling for years. I looked fine on the outside. On the inside, I was super anxious and really quite depressed. So this was actually at the white coat ceremony at the beginning of med school. And I was trying so hard to convince everyone that I was fine and that I had it under control. But really on the inside, I was struggling. So the year before this photo was taken, so year before med school, I started to develop panic disorder. So I had always kind of struggled with anxiety and depression before, but I really hadn't been hit by an absolute tidal wave of anxiety like I was the year before this photo was taken. I will never forget my first panic attack, and I had no idea, like many people at the time, that it was a panic attack. But I was actually done with my applications to med school. I had, finished my MCAT. Like I was really just waiting for interviews and hoping to go to med school. And I was working in a hospital at the time and I was a nursing assistant. So I was observing a tracheostomy being done on a patient, which if you don't know, it's basically so that they can have a more permanent breathing solution and we don't have to have a breathing tube go through their mouth because that can cause a lot of problems. So this was the first time I was seeing this procedure. And I remember when the surgeon first started working, my legs started to feel kind of wobbly. I started to feel dizzy. I just suddenly felt like my whole body was rubber and my heart was pounding and I just needed to get out. I had to get out or I was going to pass out. So I very quickly left the room, and that's when my thoughts started. I was like, wow, I didn't expect to have that reaction. I felt like I was going to pass out. I must not be able to stand the sight of blood or procedures, but I've never had a problem with that before. What is going on? Am I going to be totally unable to handle medical school? I'm going to be so humiliated. And as you can imagine, the thoughts just kept spiraling. So I started believing that anytime I felt physical sensations like that, that it was proof that I wasn't going to be able to make it through med school. And that is classic for panic disorder and other anxiety disorders. It's the development of a fear of the fear. So anxiety about your anxiety. But I had no idea at the time. So of course, like anybody else with panic disorder, this started this crazy spiral down where I felt like I was losing my mind. I started having panic attacks in the car, in open spaces. I couldn't go to the movie theaters. I would panic while looking at anatomy books. I would just sit in the library or take exams and start panicking. I would even go running and have panic attacks. And it was something where running was like a release for me. It was something that I used to love to do. So it was so disheartening and so devastating to me. And I kept trying to get away from the panic and the fear, and my life kept getting smaller and smaller, but the panic just followed me. And soon I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't able to eat. I felt like my life was essentially over. And so, fast forward to now, and clearly my life is not over, but it was a really difficult 10 or so years where I was just trying desperately to figure out different strategies to control my anxiety, to manage the way that I was feeling, and to get back to actually living my life. And I ended up doing really well in medical school. I graduated at the top of my class, and I went on to do psychiatry residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I was the chief resident there in my last year of the residency, and I did really well. And I hadn't really chosen psychiatry because of my experience, but I found that obviously it really helped. And knowing and learning some of the things that I learned while becoming a psychiatrist, I found were really helpful for my own life. And then, of course, all the trial and error from the years of trying to get better. So that's why I've started to put some of these tips together, because I do love working with people one-on-one in therapy and just talking with people, but it's not a great way to disseminate the information that I want to get across to you guys to a lot of people. So I feel like these are tips everyone needs to know. If you're struggling with anxiety, you should not have to work as hard as I work to try and get this information. All right, so it worked out okay for me. I've been an attending doctor for the past year and things are going okay. I really honestly don't often think about my anxiety disorder anymore because it's under such good control that it's kind of become a non-issue. In fact, doing this presentation has been the most I've thought about it in a very long time. So let's dive into a couple of my tips for how to manage your anxiety in general. All right, so tip number 1, I want you to start exercising. I'm really sorry. I know that that's a horrible thing to say. You guys are probably really mad at me, but it's so important. And it's one of the things that has been proven time and time again to actually work, not just for anxiety, but for depression and just for general health, general brain function. It's really, really good for you. So the goal is to exercise for at least 30 minutes a day, 4 to 5 times a week if you can, at least 3 days a week if all else fails. And you just want to do anything that's going to get your heart rate and your breathing up. And please remember that you don't have to love running. You don't have to go out and do CrossFit. Anything that you like to do that achieves the goal of getting your heart rate and your breathing up is great. And honestly, going for a brisk walk is going to be much more beneficial to you than signing up to a really expensive gym class that you never actually attend. Just saying. So why is exercise so important? Well, There are a couple of different reasons. First, if any of you guys are millennials like me, you remember Legally Blonde. And spoiler alert, in Legally Blonde, Elle does this trial at the end of the movie, and she basically cracks the case because she realizes that this person who does a lot of exercise couldn't have killed her husband because she would have been too high on endorphins from exercising to be angry enough to kill him. So the exact quote was, exercise gives you endorphins. Endorphins make you happy. Happy people just don't shoot their husbands. They just don't. And Elle Woods was right, of course. So absolutely, exercise does cause the release of endorphins and a lot of other neurotransmitters that are known for improving your mood, serotonin, dopamine, all of that good stuff. But even beyond that, the increased blood flow and the stimulation to your brain that happens with exercise is also super helpful for improving your general brain health. So we know that people that exercise have better neuronal connectivity. Their neurons are able to talk to each other more effectively. They have lower inflammatory markers surrounding their brain, so less inflammation is associated with better health overall and better brain health. And they have higher levels of protective hormones such as BDNF, so brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is responsible for keeping your neurons healthy and growing. And then finally, anxiety sensitivity is another reason why exercise can be so beneficial. So as I talked about a little bit with my story, I felt some physical symptoms of panic and anxiety that kind of kicked off my anxiety disorder. So things like feeling dizzy, feeling short of breath, feeling chest tightness, feeling your heart racing. All of those things are things that people with anxiety are much more sensitive to than people that don't have anxiety. So we're going to detect faster if our heart is racing than someone who doesn't have an anxiety disorder. We're also going to be more sensitive to things like our changes in carbon dioxide levels in our blood, so we can detect much smaller changes than the average person can. We're just more sensitive to these cues of anxiety. And exercise is great because it's a way to intentionally induce those physical symptoms in yourself. And a common theme for anxiety is that avoiding what you are afraid of worsens the anxiety. While in contrast, exposing yourself to what you're afraid of is going to improve the anxiety. So here, you're using exercise to expose yourself to the physical symptoms that make you uncomfortable, and that is going to improve your anxiety. All right, tip number 2 is about building resilience. So a lot of people think about anxiety as just trying to decrease your level of anxiety as much as possible. So if you're struggling, then the recipe is to reduce the amount of anxiety you feel. And yeah, I mean, that's a good tactic, and that's what a lot of the advice is going to focus on. But you can also do the other part of the equation, which is building resilience. So yes, how much you suffer from your anxiety is going to be directly proportional to the amount of anxiety you experience, but it is also going to be inversely proportional to the amount of resilience you have, or the amount of strength and mental fortitude that you can build. So increasing resilience, just like decreasing anxiety, is a great way to decrease the amount of suffering you feel with your anxiety disorder. So how do we build resilience? Well, there are a million different ways, but a couple of my favorite things are just having positive self-talk about your anxiety. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but you really have to convince yourself that you can handle anything. And that includes the anxiety that you feel. You have to stop telling yourself, I can't take this anymore. I can't do this anxiety. This has to go away. And you don't necessarily have to believe it at first, but you just have to keep telling yourself that. And eventually the belief will follow. You also want to start setting small goals and then actually achieving them. So that is a great way for you to build confidence in yourself. We all feel confident when we achieve something that we're setting out to do. And even if that's something that's really small, it still is a mood booster for you. So you're going to want to start much smaller than you think you should. And you want to focus on what we call SMART goals. So SMART goals are generally goals that are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, so they're actually doable, relevant, and time bound. So these criteria kind of make up the SMART goal acronym, which could be its own series in and of itself. But it's just a way to frame your thoughts around how do you set a goal that you can actually achieve. So for example, with my patients who are struggling with depression, I will tell them to go out on their porch 2 minutes a day, every day. Like if they feel like they can't get out of bed and they can't go run a marathon, that's okay. We're not going to start with having them run a 5K. We're going to start with having them go stand out on the porch, because you want them to go and actually be able to achieve the goal that you're giving them, so that they then get more confidence and know that they can achieve more goals in the future. Using affirmations can also be really helpful in building resilience, and it's something that I never really bought into until recently, but I actually find it to be really helpful. So you can go about this in a couple different ways, but one thing I like to do is put Post-it notes on my mirror that have nice affirmations on them, or put them as reminders in my phone so they'll go off at various times during the day. And in general, with your affirmations, you want to make them concrete and specific again, and also sort of present focus. So for example, you don't want to say, I will feel calm and my anxiety will get better someday. You want to say, I feel calm and my anxiety is gone. So you want to say it like it's something that's already happened, so that you can kind of trick your brain a little bit easier into believing it. So another trick that I find really helpful is from David Goggins. He's this super awesome ultra marathoner, former Navy SEAL guy who's written a bunch of crazy intense self-help stuff. And I think some of it can be a little bit intimidating, obviously, considering everything he's gone through. It kind of makes sense. But I think there's a lot of really good stuff in there too. So one thing he does is called the cookie jar technique. And this is a technique where he says you can do this metaphorically or physically. So you bring to mind, when you're in a difficult situation, you just bring to mind all of the times that you've succeeded in the past. So he gives the example of being towards the end of a marathon that he had not trained at all for. He just was one day I'm going to run a marathon. So he was really struggling at the end, which is impressive that he survived that long. But he started bringing up thoughts of all of the other difficult things that he had endured and made it through in his life. And it kind of gave him the push that he needed to make it to the end. So you can do that in your own life. So think of ways that you've succeeded. And I don't believe you if you're saying, well, there's no way that I've ever succeeded before in my life. If you have survived a day with anxiety, that is a win. And if you're sitting here watching this, then you took a step towards getting your anxiety better when you could have not. You might have also done something like graduated high school. That's a pretty big deal. You might have had a kid. Raising a kid is no joke. I will tell you that. We just had some massive temper tantrums tonight, and it's hard. But everyone has done things that they can be proud of and that show that they are strong and that they can accomplish really hard things when they want to put their minds to it. And so using this cookie jar technique can kind of push you through difficult times, including things like panic attacks. And then so finally, with building resilience, you also want to be really careful with how you're talking about other people. Oftentimes, our brains can't really tell the difference between how we're talking about someone else and how we're talking about ourselves. So if you're over here talking about how Karen's such a loser and she's never going to get anywhere with her life and she's so dumb, your brain may start to believe that you're a loser and that you're never going to get anywhere with your life and that you're so dumb. So you kind of are the gossip you put out there. And I also just kind of believe in juju, and you want good juju and not bad juju. So there's that. All right, so tip number 3 is mindfulness. So mindfulness was kind of brought to the US and to the Western world in general by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is a researcher in that space. And he defined mindfulness as the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of the experience moment by moment. So even that quote makes you feel more relaxed, right? So mindfulness is just being in the present moment, not judging what's going on around you as good or bad, but simply letting it be, and also opening to any experience that you're having. So this table kind of shows why mindfulness can be helpful for anxiety. So think about your anxiety levels rising when you are trying to call your spouse and they're not answering. So you start to think, oh my God, they've died in a car accident. Like, this is horrible. I'm going to be a single mom now. Things are going to be really awful. I already miss them. And you're like freaking out because you're so far ahead in the future and it just doesn't make any sense. In the present, most of the time, you're actually fine and the thing that you're fearing is not actually happening. So using mindfulness to kind of bring yourself back to the present can be really helpful. Most of that anxiety, like I said, is going to happen in the future. Anxiety is also extremely judgmental. So anxiety will tell you you can't stand these physical sensations, that you're a failure. It'll be harsh and critical towards you. It'll tell you that these problems that you're having are not normal. And mindfulness is a way of kind of being more accepting, more non-judgmental. So if I have anxiety, mindfulness helps me understand that that's just my experience right now, and that's okay. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to get into med school and I'm not going to become a doctor and all the things that I've done are wasted. It just means I have anxiety right now. Likewise, anxiety is very much so rooted in resistance and avoidance. So we know that what we resist is going to persist. So anxiety is like a naughty child who's not getting enough attention from their parents. So they start acting out so that they get attention, even if it's bad attention. Your anxiety is the same way. If you give it attention, even if it's negative attention and trying to push it away or get rid of the thoughts, it's going to be more sticky and it's going to hang around more easily. In contrast with mindfulness, you're opening up to the experiences that you're having. You're not judging them. You're allowing them to be there. And that kind of relaxing into the moment gives you some more peace. And the naughty little child of anxiety starts to calm down. So I think of this stuff as a Chinese finger trap. If you guys ever played with that when you were a kid. So with the Chinese finger trap, you put your fingers in either end of this woven tube, and then you try to pull your fingers out of the woven tube. And when you pull your fingers out, the tube actually gets tighter. It kind of clamps down on you, so you can't actually get your fingers out. So in order to escape from the Chinese finger trap, you have to push your fingers in together so that the tube loosens. And mindfulness is a lot like pushing your fingers in together. You're leaning into the discomfort so that you can then get some freedom and some space. All right, so tip number 4 is going to be based in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is proven time and time again to be extremely effective for anxiety. So tip number 4 is about cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are just ways of seeing the world that can sometimes be unhelpful and are often untrue. So this is the whole premise behind the idea that thoughts are not facts. And you've heard me say that before, I'm sure, if you followed me on social media. Thoughts are not facts, and our brains can be really deceiving. And a lot of the ways in which they are deceiving is because of these cognitive biases. So just to give you a couple examples, mental filter is one type of cognitive bias. So this refers to just noticing when there's bad or anxiety-provoking things that are happening. So you may be someone who has panic attacks while you're driving, and the times when you've had panic attacks while you're driving are things that you remember very strongly, whereas you don't necessarily remember the times when you were driving and did not have panic attacks. So certain things are going to be filtered through your mind more easily. Another really good example of a cognitive bias is emotional reasoning. So that just refers to accepting your emotions as being factual. So a good example of this is when people are feeling really anxious about something, the higher their anxiety level, the more they're convinced that it's actually true. So again, in that example of where the spouse was calling their loved one and they weren't picking up the phone and they were thinking they were dead, someone who was way more anxious about that scenario coming true is going to be way more likely to actually buy into that being true. So in either scenario, the spouse may actually be fine, but the person who's more anxious about it is going to be less likely. So an example of emotional reasoning would be that example of the spouse not being able to reach their loved one and thinking that they've been in a terrible car accident that I gave you earlier. So somebody who is more anxious about that being true is going to be more likely to buy into it. They're going to be more stuck into thinking it's true. Another example would be someone who really strongly believes that their spouse is cheating on them and maybe doesn't necessarily have evidence as to that, but feels it really strongly. And just because you feel something really strongly doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Another example of a cognitive bias is this overgeneralizing. So a great and classic example of this that I would do all the time is if I would have a day where I did poorly on a quiz or I had a bad exam, or even like with this webinar and, putting it together, if I wasn't happy with one of the slides or something like that, I would start thinking I'm a failure, or this is never going to work out, or I'm never going to get this information across, or I'm not going to do well in school, or I'm never going to be able to be a doctor. So taking like one tiny piece of evidence and really generalizing it to a lot of different things in your life is usually not helpful. So with these cognitive biases, what we want to do is learn them. So this is something we're going to talk a lot about in the course, learning as many cognitive biases as possible and noticing them when they come up. So you can notice them, label them as the cognitive bias they are, or just in general, labeling them as thoughts. And then you want to challenge them. So challenging them can take a couple of different forms, but one of my favorites is by asking yourself, is this thought absolutely true? Do I know this with certainty? So for example, I had a patient once tell me that she was the worst person who had ever lived. Clearly, you don't even have to know who my patient was to know that that's not true, right? You can bring to mind several dictators, murderers, like evil people who were definitely worse than who my patient was, because my patient wasn't one of those type of people. So is it absolutely true? Can you know for certainty that it's true? Can I know for certainty that my spouse is not picking up the phone because they have died? No, I don't know for sure that that's true. I might feel it, but I don't know for sure that it's true. Is it something that's helpful? So that's the next question that you can ask yourself, because you might be able to convince yourself, if the anxiety is really strong, that it's absolutely true. There's no getting around it. Like, I really am the worst person ever, or no, I'm positive my spouse has died. Like, I'm sure of it. But is that a helpful thought? So is it going to help you get closer to the goals that you want to achieve if you decide to believe that thought? So, for example, with my patient, if she chooses to believe that she is indeed the worst person who has ever lived, is that helpful? Is that getting her closer to her goals, getting her closer to being the type of person she wants to be? Probably not. And then it's just about letting those thoughts go. All right, so tip number 5 is going to be to build self-compassion. So self-compassion is one of my favorite things to think about and try to work on, because it's something I really struggle with, to be honest. But anxiety actually thrives off of self-criticism and harshness and just anger and judgmental things, and just ick, not being nice to yourself in general. So anxiety is going to tell you things like, I'll never be able to cope with this anxiety. I am never going to be able to make it to med school. I'm such a terrible person for feeling this way. Why am I so weak? Nobody else has this problem. I'm always feeling anxious. I shouldn't be feeling anxious about this. And that's going to make your anxiety kind of spiral, because like we talked about earlier, you can improve your anxiety by decreasing your overall anxiety level or by increasing your resilience. And if you are constantly criticizing yourself and being mean to yourself, you're decreasing your resilience. You're making yourself less confident that you're able to handle the things that come your way, including your anxiety. So the antidote for this self-criticism is self-compassion. And this is a concept that was developed by a researcher named Kristin Neff, who still talks a lot about the subject. She actually did a pretty well-known TED Talk many years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but where she talked about the differences between self-compassion and self-esteem. And so I would highly recommend any of her books or workbooks or whatever. They're all super helpful. But she breaks down self-compassion into these 3 characteristics. So she says that self-compassion includes self-kindness, which she just generally defines as being gentle and understanding with yourself rather than harsh and judgmental. So I will tell my patients to think about themselves as a child. So unless you really, really hate kids, most of us can feel a sense of pity for them when they're hurting, like if they fall and bump their knee. Most of us can kind of empathize with that and be kind towards them. So I tell my patients to try and remember that they were once a little child as well, and that they were also deserving of that self-compassion and that self-kindness, and that little child that they once were is still somewhere inside of them. So sometimes that can be an easier way to stomach that self-kindness if it's not something you're used to feeling. Common humanity is the next ingredient for self-compassion. And Kristin Neff kind of talks about the concept of just connecting with other people. So compassion meaning to suffer with. So acknowledging that we all suffer in some way, and we all are connected in some way in this suffering. And it's not nice to know that other people are suffering, but it's kind of nice to know that you're not alone. So I remember when I first learned about panic disorder and what it was, and that it was something that had been documented and other people were dealing with, I felt a tremendous sense of relief. Like, I'm not a weirdo. Like, there are a lot of other people that are going through this, that if they can get help, so can I. And it just kind of gives you a sense of belonging and connectedness and makes you feel less isolated and alone. And then the last component of self-compassion that she talks about is what we've already touched on, which is mindfulness. So in the context of self-compassion, we're talking about holding your experiences. So like, say you do something that you think is stupid, holding that in a balanced awareness rather than ignoring it or exaggerating it. So, for example, if I, said something really embarrassing in a social situation, I'm going to feel compassionate towards myself. And one way that I'm going to show myself compassion is by acknowledging, yeah, that was not the best statement I could have made, but I'll be okay. I'll rebound from it. So I'm not ignoring the fact that I made a stupid comment and I'm kind of embarrassed by it, but I'm also not exaggerating it and deciding that my entire social life is over and I'm going to be the biggest loser ever for the rest of my life. Anyways, so all of this stuff maybe doesn't come easily to you, but they're all things that you can work on and get better at and study and read. And they're things that I actually have a whole module in the Anxiety Bootcamp course just focused on building self-compassion and how you can do that and how you can nourish each of these areas of self-compassion. All right, so speaking of which, let's talk for a second about the Anxiety Bootcamp course. So like I mentioned earlier, the bootcamp course is a compilation of all of the tips and tricks and the techniques that I've used to manage anxiety in myself and in my patients. So if you've liked this sort of tip of the iceberg, and you found these tips to be helpful at all, this is where we really dive into the meat of everything. And the goal of this course is to teach you guys the things that took me 10 to 12 years to figure out. So all of my training, all of my personal experience is wrapped up into this course. So really, this is meant for people who really want to learn more about their anxiety and generally how to manage it, how to keep your anxiety from interfering with your day-to-day life and keep it from controlling you. Just generally reduce your stress, or if you have panic attacks or intrusive thoughts or scary thoughts that you feel like are really sticky and hard to get rid of, this is something that can be very helpful. So again, I want to acknowledge that this is not going to be medical advice. This is educational content and actually works best if you do have a relationship with a doctor or a therapist that you're working with, and certainly does not replace or supersede their advice. But just the things that I've learned over the years and stuff that I wish somebody would have told me 10 years ago and would have made my journey through panic disorder and through anxiety so much easier. So overall, this is going to be 10 sessions. You can do it in 10 days. You can do it in 10 weeks, like one course a week. You can repeat it multiple times, whatever you want to do. But it's going to be a work at your own pace kind of thing because you're going to have access to all of the course materials forever. So the modules cover a variety of different things. It covers lifestyle interventions to help with anxiety, just an overview of different anxiety disorders and what the symptoms are, so you can feel a little bit more empowered to understand what's going on from an actual reliable source and not just Dr. Google. So also CBT skills, so cognitive behavioral therapy, like I mentioned. I'm going to teach you a lot more about those cognitive biases and how to work with them. We're going to learn a lot more about mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, self-compassion, different interpersonal skills, how setting boundaries can help with your anxiety, lots and lots more. So it's going to include videos, presentations like this one, but of course in much more depth, and worksheets with writing prompts and activities for you to do. And that's going to be a way to help you process and learn some of the information and have it actually stick. So I've also got a couple of guided meditations that you can do, and there's going to be access to an exclusive Facebook group for questions and support that I'm going to be really involved in moderating. So if this sounds like something that is interesting to you, head over to my website, go to the courses section, and sign up. So if you sign up before October 30th, which is the pre-sale period, so the course actually goes live on October 30th, then you're going to be able to get 50% off of the course. So it's a huge cut if you buy it during pre-sale. And then also the first 50 people to use the code early when they check out are going to get another $200 off. So this is a course that is valued, if I took the individual sessions and meditation opportunities together, would be valued between $3,000 and $5,000. So you are saving quite a bit of money with the regular price of the course and taking 50% off and then another $200 off. It is something that I think can add a tremendous amount of value to your life and really help significantly with the anxiety for a lot less than what it would cost to get all of this information yourself, and ultimately a lot less cost and as far as time and heartache, which is kind of what I experienced. So if you're interested, head over to my website. You can go to courses-1, or you can just go to services and look into the courses tab. And with that, let me know what questions you have about this or anything else related to anxiety. And feel free to also give me some feedback on these tips. I would love to know what you think, what you feel like has been helpful for you, and what you feel like hasn't been helpful, and how I can help in the future. All right, guys, thanks for hanging with me, and I will stick around for a while for any questions that might come up.